This Air Force doesn't quite aim high enough. This is Sega Masters. As the Sega Master System moves on from its North American debut, its second month in the US market saw 3 new releases, 2 of which came on Sega cards. We'll be looking at one of those Sega cards in today's episode, F-16 Fighting Falcon, or just F-16 fighters it's known in some other parts of the world. If this image of a fighter jet on the title screen hadn't tipped you off already, it's a flight combat simulator, a genre that was rapidly becoming popular on home computers throughout the 1980s, but may have seemed like an odd fit on a dedicated cartridge console promising arcade action. F-16 Fighting Falcon is indeed a port of a computer title, one that was originally developed by American studio Nexa and released by ASCII on the Japanese MSX computer in 1984. As the title implies, it allowed you to take the controls of an F-16 Falcon and participate in a mission to patrol the skies and shoot down as many enemy MiGs as possible. While it may not look like much nowadays, it was the forerunner of the long-running Falcon line of flight simulators from Spectrum Holobyte, who eventually absorbed Nexa in 1987. For whatever reason, Sega decided they needed a conversion of F-16 Fighting Falcon for their 8-bit console, and the person tasked to port it to the Mark III was none other than future Sega superstar Yuji Naka, making this one of his first contributions to Sega's 8-bit platform. It certainly won't be the last time his name is mentioned in this series. F-16 Fighting Falcon does make a nice first impression with this title screen, featuring a cool rendered jet and a solid opening theme, but any hopes of at least a decent experience are quickly dashed the moment you hit the start button. This card offers 10 levels of air combat, and you get to choose which one to start from, which determines how many targets you need to shoot down to advance as well as their skill level. Once you make your selection, you take to the air for some aerial dogfighting. You instantly start in flight without having to take off, unlike most other flight sims, and your Falcon is equipped with a 20mm Gatling gun and a very limited supply of guided missiles to take down your foes, who are also armed with the same weapons themselves. Incredibly, this Master System version looks almost identically to the MSX original, from the cluttered instrument panel taking up a third of the screen to the rather primitive graphics depicting the action. Visuals that may have been sufficient back in 1984, but are far below what we've already seen the Master System capable of producing, and must have seemed terribly out of date by the time the card hit the US 2 years later. All you get to see are a wireframe grid representing the ground and monochromatic blobs that I'm assuming are supposed to be the enemy jets, all set against a single colored background that's exactly the same for all but 2 levels, which feature night flying or soaring through fog. Some video game historians have speculated that F-16 Fighting Falcon was originally intended to be released on the Master System's predecessor in Japan, the SG-1000, before being bumped up to the 8-bit console at the last minute. That theory is further fueled by the fact that this card is the only Master System release to use a hidden graphics mode the Western console carried over from the Mark III, which was originally backwards compatible with the SG-1000. As an unintended consequence, F-16 Fighting Falcon will not work with the Genesis Power Base converter. It will only boot up on an actual Master System console. Of course, the paltry visuals can be overlooked if the game was any fun to play, but the sad fact is F-16 Fighting Falcon is quite the opposite. Simply put, the programmers tried too hard to stay faithful to the original MSX version, neglecting that what works for computer games doesn't always translate smoothly to the console realm. And flight simulators are a prime example. For starters, computer flight simulators are often known for featuring a vast array of essential functions required to survive the combat, as well as operate the aircraft, and they usually have a keyboard handy to easily handle those numerous functions. Most console gamers, on the other hand, do not have the patience that sophisticated flight sims often call for. They mainly want straightforward arcade-style exercises like Afterburner that allow them to simply take to the sky and blast enemy fighters out of the air without having to worry about tedious odds and ends. There's also the matter of how a controller with just 2 fire buttons is supposed to handle all those functions. Sega actually addressed that issue with the original Japanese version by allowing compatibility with their SK1100 keyboard, which was originally created for the SG-1000, another connection with the Mark III's forebearer. It plugged into a special port on the Mark III console and allowed gamers to play F-16 Fighting Falcon just like any other computer flight sim. Knowing that not everyone would have access to the keyboard, especially outside of Japan, Sega's other answer was to require would-be pilots to use both of the console's gamepads together to operate your fighter plane. Controller 1 is used to steer and bank your plane and fire your 2 selectable weapons, while the second controller handles airspeed, radar locking, and deploys your electronic countermeasures to ward off enemy missiles fired at you. It can seem like too much effort is needed to remember what button does what, but that's the least of this card's problems, as actually trying to do anything can be frustrating, especially shooting down enemy aircraft. Everything moves at a sluggish frame rate, and it doesn't help that there's a slight lag from when you push the buttons to when something actually happens on screen. Whether it's firing your weapons, turning your plane, or even simply trying to maneuver a MiG into your sights. As a result, just taking out even one hostile plane can be an unnecessary struggle, which can try the patience of most flight jockeys, if they're not already bored by the levels dragging on for far too long. Adding to the tedium is the lack of audio, as the only sounds during the combat are the droning of your jet engines, the firing of your weapons, and a rather annoying beeping when your control panel alerts you of something, none of which are fun to listen to. Reportedly, a cheat code entered on the title screen can enable a hidden background tune, though it's really not worth the effort. There really isn't much else to say about F-16 fighting Falcon, which doesn't offer anything other than dull, annoying gameplay that's hampered by a convoluted control setup. Sega may have thought that bringing a sophisticated computer title to the Master System was a good idea, yet despite their best efforts, F-16 fighting Falcon just didn't fit on a mid-1980s cartridge platform. Eventually, game developers would figure out how to make flight combat simulators that work on consoles, and there are indeed better titles out there to scratch the aerial dogfighting itch, so pass on this one.